If I were to start a movie like this, you'll probably expect this. And if I were to start a movie like this, you would probably start thinking about dudes in tight suits, well-choreographed fights, and some aliens. And even if I were to start a movie like this, maybe a little less clear, but you could reasonably guess it would be high budget, with a few A-list actors, and there's a good chance it's a sequel. Like a really good chance. But what if I started a movie like this? What comes to mind? Whether you've seen that logo before or not, that might be a difficult question to answer, so maybe some research would help. Let's check their About page. What about their Twitter? Oh, forget it. I'll explain myself. A24 is a movie distribution company that was founded by Daniel Katz, David Finkel, and John Hodges in 2012. In just a few short years, they established themselves as crowd and critic favorites, working on more than 50 films and receiving 25 Academy Award nominations. With that kind of success and brand reputation, it begs the question, what makes a film A24? Defining art has always been a particularly difficult task, and cinema is no different. You could look at it simply, as Martin Scorsese says, as a matter of what's in frame and what's out. Or, more esoterically, as Orson Welles described cinema as a ribbon of a dream. Then there are the hundreds of scholarly articles that discuss film's indexicality, identity, syntax, and semantics. But perhaps the most applicable lens with which to view A24's filmography is the auteur theory. By looking at 4 A24 produced and distributed films, The Last Black Man in San Francisco, Moonlight, Midsummer, and Uncut Gems, I'll make the argument that the term auteur can extend beyond the director, which is typically reserved for, to producer and distributor as well. So quick summary. What is auteur theory? In the mid-1950s, François Truffaut, a French film scholar, published Une certaine tendance du cinéma français, a certain tendency in French cinema, in the film magazine Cahiers du Cinéma. He criticized many French directors for being too faithful to the script, arguing that better films could be made when the director becomes the author, giving them flexibility over production. In 1962, American film critic Andrew Saris adapted this idea and wrote Notes on the Auteur Theory, within which he began applying Truffaut's concepts to Hollywood movies and coined the term auteur. For this analysis, I will focus on the 3 components of what makes an auteur as outlined by Saris in ascending order of importance. 1. Technical competence. 2. Distinguishable personality. And 3. Interior meaning. While they have been disputed, these at least serve as a good outline for elaboration. First, technical competence. This quality can be explained as the ability of a director to meet fundamental expectations. In other words, they must, at the very least, have a substantial understanding of how movies are made, from composition to acting to sound design to post-processing. How can directors show this? They must use all of the available resources to make a technically sound film. This means intelligent casting, innovative camera movement, high-quality sets, acute sound design, everything it takes to make a movie more than an amateur work. As Saris explains, a great director has to be at least a good director. So too then must A24 as a production house have technical competence in order to be considered auteur. And technical competence it has indeed. Second, distinguishable personality. This is where things get really interesting. Saris elaborates that in order to be qualified as an auteur, a director must exhibit certain recurrent characteristics of style. I would argue that there are a few major recurrences that appear across the various bodies of A24's work. The first is the type of stories they elect to produce. The narratives are one-offs, which is rare in the current cinematic atmosphere, but not a single one is a sequel. Though they vary greatly in terms of genre, cast, and director, The one thing they share is they are all unique stories. The odyssey of a man coming to terms with his past as it is pulled away from him. A young African-American man grappling with his identity. An idyllic retreat turned horrific nightmare. A gambling addict trying to make it big. These vague synopses may not sound unique, but the films that come out of them are poignant and powerful, putting a focus on character growth and development. The style of story is so niche that someone even fed the scripts into a machine learning algorithm to develop new pitch ideas. And, as weird as they all are, as soon as I read one I think to myself, yep, that sounds like A24. The second distinguishable characteristic of an A24 film is the focus on visual style. An important distinction is that the style between films is not necessarily consistent, but the style within films is. This comes across in a few ways, but perhaps most noticeable of all is the constant motif of colors. The dreamy nostalgia of The Last Black Man in San Francisco. The purples and blues of Moonlight. The contrasting costumes in Midsummer. And the edgy, gaunt hues of Uncut Gems. Each film is oozing with a style all its own, and yet they are all A24. As Moonlight director Barry Jenkins wrote, "I know what an A24 film is, but no A24 film is like any other." The third distinguishing characteristic is narrative structure. The 3-act structure is far from revolutionary, and I would be a fool to say A24 is somehow special for using it. What makes the structure of their narratives distinguishable, though, is the masterful focus on the third act. No matter how mundane a film may have been up to that point, the third act almost always leaves its audiences reeling. Be it from the immense emotional toll of films like The Last Black Man in San Francisco or Moonlight, the sheer horror of Midsummer, or the momentary excitement immediately halted by unbelievable shock at the end of Uncut Gems. It is this narrative structure that contributes to the third and final criteria for auteur theory, interior meaning. Saras describes interior meaning as the ultimate glory of the cinema as an art, and further elaborates that interior meaning is extrapolated from the tension between a director's personality and his material. It is perhaps the most difficult of the criteria to understand, because it is notably, as Saras writes, impossible to articulate in non-cinematic terms. He also alludes that all he can do is point at the specific beauties of interior meaning on the screen. They are these brief epiphanies where the audience stops and thinks to themselves, that is why I love movies. Because they can make us feel something. Those brief moments are impossible to explain, but that is perhaps what makes them all the more powerful. Each film leaves you with a profound emotion, one that lasts long after the credits roll. The auteur theory was almost never meant to be applied exclusively to directors as it so often is, because as Peter Wolin said, the auteur theory does not limit itself to acclaiming the director as the main author of a film. It reveals authors where none had been seen before. I believe A24 to be that previously unseen author, and I am excited to see what they write next.